Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.
Hello, I'm Lorene Mills, and welcome to Report from Santa Fe. We are honored today to have as our guest Tim Keller, the Auditor for the state of New Mexico. Thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here today. Thanks for having me on.
Well, you were a former state senator. You worked on some very big... You were actually the Senate Majority Whip.
Yes,
when you were
right.
in the Senate. Do you miss that? We're taping after the session's over. Did you ever wish that you were back in the Senate?
There's always a few days where I wish I was back in the Senate, in the middle of a big debate or something like that. And it's a special place, and I'll always miss it. But I had a great 6 years, and I think for me too, year-round, I love what I'm doing. So
yes.
At least it's only a couple of days I wish I was back in the Senate.
Yes. Well, tell us, you've been an auditor for a little over a year now. Mm-hmm. And you went in there, one of the bills that you introduced year after year in the Senate was that we should have a tax expenditure budget, which sounds very complicated and very strange. Would you tell us what this project is, what new developments there are, why we need to do this?
Sure. Well, it was, as you mentioned, a key issue for me in my whole time in the Senate. And we made a lot of progress in terms of awareness, but basically it's just this. Our state gives away tax incentives or rebates or deductions or exemptions to businesses and individuals. And in total, they really add up fast. And so in total, they're worth about $1 billion of money that we choose not to collect. And so that's done through basically a series of 400 plus tax loopholes, whatever you want to sort of technically call them. So when you put all that together, we have a Swiss cheese, essentially, of tax code, with giant holes in it. And the tragedy has always been we don't really know if those tax incentives have a good return on investment. So are they redundant or not needed, out of date, only for a single person or whatever? We've never been able to get that kind of return on investment data. So I always tried to get it in the legislature, and one of the reasons why I ran for auditor was because out of this office, we actually might be able to make some progress. And so I'm excited. There's a new GASB ruling, which sounds very technocratic, but it means that New Mexico can't ignore it. But GASB 77 is going to require several of these programs in our state to have essentially a return on investment calculation.
Forgive me, who or what is this famous GASB?
Right.
Great GASB.
GASB is just the Federal Standards Accounting Board, federal government. And they just write the rules for auditing in governmental auditing. But their rulings are very important in terms of disclosure and transparency. And so basically all they're saying is, hey, if you're a business who gets a tax, you forego paying a tax, you just have to disclose how much you're foregoing. Mm-hmm. But that key number is what we've never been able to get and is essentially the denominator to determine return on investment for a tax credit.
So I just want to focus on this for a minute. Mm-hmm. Our state doesn't collect $1 billion in taxes because of all these special exemptions or loopholes. Some of them, it's jokingly called the buggy whip manufacturers. We no longer need buggy whips, and yet, not that there is such an exemption, but they would still be getting this. Yeah. But there are so many small ones, and I don't want to offend anybody, but there's airplane mechanics, and there's certain oil and gas people, and there's just so many small things, and together they all add up at a time of budget crisis like this, when we are this very fiscal year down as much as $900 million, closing some of these loopholes would make up for that. And taxes wouldn't have to be raised on the rest of us. And so I love this project. I really encourage you. I want an update whenever anything is being made. But what is the reluctance? Why wouldn't someone want to look at the big picture and say, well, that person's dead and that industry is gone and we don't need this anymore and those people are doing fine. What's wrong with taking a practical look?
Well, in general, there's nothing wrong with it. I think when we layer in politics, unfortunately, the issue is that every one of those groups is essentially a special interest. And sometimes they're not what we think of as special interests, like they could be low-income folks, or, there's all sorts of categories, people who need dialysis, things like that. But at the end of the day, they're a special interest. And the reason they got that loophole is because they came up to the roundhouse and fought for it. And so no one wants to give it up, even if it's really not needed anymore economically for our state. So it really takes some leadership to go into this. I mean, there's plenty of people who will get mad at you when you talk about the issue. And so that's why it's very not palatable for a lot of folks to really dive into. But 17 other states have done it. I think it goes up every year. And so it's even a national problem. You hear national politicians talking about tax loopholes. And so at the end of the day, I think at least what people agree is that there is possibly a grand bargain that we might have to do someday, which is close a bunch of loopholes. And then we actually might even be able to drop some tax rates for everyone.
Yeah.
So,
our taxes
and that's
could go
even
down.
Representative Senator Scherer and I used to work together, totally opposite ends of the spectrum, but we agree on this notion that there's enough on the table where we could probably accomplish that. So I'm still hopeful, but it is really going to take all hands on deck, and you just have to tell people, you got what you needed for a while, and now it's time to be fair to everyone else.
And some of those loopholes, I must admit, are very beloved. For example, the film incentive program,
Sure.
$50 million. But we're also happy with Breaking Bad and
Yeah.
all these other programs, Better Call Saul. The people don't want. So every special interest has its own fan club. But if you say it's going to take leadership, then I'm not going to hold my breath.
There
Because
you go.
as we saw in the last session, there might be leadership in parts and small areas, but the vision for the best way to run our state is maybe resting right now, maybe dormant.
Mm-hmm.
And I pray for it to come back because we have so many extraordinary things. Now, let's go back to the bad news about the budget this session. And you have a couple of articles that came out, editorials. New Mexico's working capital is $1 billion opportunity was one of them. And so what here, state lacks efficient system as $4.4 billion is unspent. So you have been discovering in your job as auditor these places where money is sort of stranded and hasn't been able to be used. Tell me about where you found these piles of money and how we can get them back into circulation.
Sure. Well, there's it's a fascinating issue in that it's one of these that it sounds almost too good to be true. So I think it is important to explain where the money is and how it works. But at the end of the day, our state could do a much better job of liberating these dollars from red tape and getting them into the economy. So the way it works is like this. There's roughly, we'll use round numbers just to keep it simple. There's about 400 different accounts in state government. So there's all sorts of accounts. And when you look at them, these are accounts that don't revert automatically. Many do, like operating budget money and things like that. They're essentially like one-time money. So money goes into an account and then it sits there until it's spent. And so these are not the general accounts that the sort of legislature looks at as part of the budget process. Different types of money. This is one-time money for a one-time project. It's not reoccurring budget money. So that's sort of one piece. Now, so what happens is basically every year the legislature allocates one-time money either through capital outlay, the pork projects, or through they will take a percentage of a tax and give it to a road fund, something like that. And then the governor's office and the administration also does this. It's called dedicated revenue. So they will take like a fee for your license or something like that, and it goes to smoking cessation or whatever the fund is. There are hundreds of these funds, and money is just piling up. And in each fund, they're usually dedicated for something already. So it's not like this money is not allocated. It's all allocated to specific projects. Could be the environment, could be renewable energy projects, could be water projects, roads, bridges. It's all allocated. But what's happened in our state is it essentially is piling up faster than we're able to process it and get it out the door. And now when you add it all up, it's $4.4 billion. Now, let's take just one other kind of angle at this. When you slice it, there's about $1 billion in reserves. We need that. It's prudent budgeting. There's about $1 billion in debt service. That's just what we have. but there's about $2 billion that is really only bureaucratically tied up. And that's what we can focus on. So out of that $2 billion, about $1 billion is the capital outlay that's stuck for all sorts of reasons. But the other $1 billion is sitting in these executive funds for specific projects that the legislature never even sees, or loan funds that are meant for New Mexicans to use but are unused.
So there's several things that can be done with this money. One thing, which would be to claw it back, but often it's already earmarked and allocated and has to be for something. The other thing is to push it forward, light a fire under it, get it spent, because the economy needs that infusion right now. And so I was speaking with Senator Smith about this issue itself, and he quoted Senator Eddie Lopez, a now deceased wonderful senator, who said, "We, the legislature, can propose, but the executive can dispose." So if there were good communications between the DFA, Department of Finance Administration, and the governor, we could encourage them to light a fire under some of these projects and to get them done. Now, there is an aspect of that capital outlay that sometimes there isn't enough to finish a project, so they're waiting to get more money so they can finish. But some of them have all the money they need, and for some reason they're just stranded there. Yeah. And you are writing these articles and waving this flag saying, the money's there, let's use it.
That's right. And for us, there's a number of reasons, and we can they point to a solution. So we think about, there's certain projects that are waiting for matching funds, or they're waiting for, that could be federal matching funds, or it could be city and county dollars that they're waiting on. Or the state wants one thing and the city or a county wants another thing, and so they don't always agree. But when you layer all this in, you're exactly right. The point is, with effort, we could actually go through this and sort of push it out the door better. And so if we think about $2 billion and what it would mean if we just squeezed essentially, or unleashed, sort of let loose, even 10% of that, it would be a transformational stimulus package for New Mexico. So the way I look at this is, what leader, whether it's governor or mayor or whatever, why wouldn't you want to spend those dollars? And so it's worth the effort to go in and say, okay, is this project, can it happen, can it not, what do we need, et cetera? And then if not, it is up to other folks if that money can maybe be moved or reallocated. But the first step should be, can we spend it? And that's what's missing right now. And I think that's really unfortunate for New Mexico, because this is a way right in front of us to help turn around our state.
Stimulate the economy. It would be amazing. And the nice thing is that it's all over the state. Yeah. There's a water project in the southwestern part. There's a courthouse in another part. There's, infrastructure, and it would work, boost the economy in every corner of the state. Yeah. So good luck with that. Keep us posted, because
and I'll let you know. One fun just to think about too is even we found $200 million. We're not even a penny moved. So in other words, these were rural infrastructure loan funds all around the state, and not a penny was spent. So I know it's complicated, but there's no excuse for that, right? Yeah. That money is supposed to be spent one way or another. So I believe this is also a message of hope, and this can be something good for our state.
Well, good. We're speaking today with our New Mexico State Auditor, Tim Keller. We just finished the 30-day session, the session that's for the budget, and we had a lot of heartache, because we remember in December we thought we had $230 million, and then in the first week of the session it was down to only $30 million new dollars, and then 2 weeks into the session, Senator Smith announces that we may be down as much as $900 million for this fiscal year. So they started doing all these techniques to get more money, and I love the names of them. They did sweeps. They sanded some budgets. They shoveled. You said even swap. They shaved some of the budget. So this is a nice way of saying what I said that they were all carpentry terms, because we're hoping that something beautiful is being built from this. Are these standard accounting terms that for finding loose money? obviously they didn't want to raise our taxes, and we were in a real hole. So they did what they could. I think they did pretty well considering what they had, the deficit that was thrown at them. But tell me about these terms. And is this common to shave down a little from everybody to get a few grains of sand down here?
Well, they are commonly used terms, and they're sort of slang, if you will, financial slang. Uh-huh. But, they're strategies, really, what's behind them. And they're strategies that, in the short term, tend to be sort of politically possible. To plug a one-time hole. So we did this even when I was in the legislature back, I think, in 2010. So, sanding and shaving are really the same thing. But that basically says, you know what, we're just going to cut a little bit from everyone. And even our office was cut, just like everyone else. And the idea is that in any budget, there's always a little bit of flex. And so if it's a small percentage, like 2%, you really can kind of squeeze that out. And you usually see it in things like vacancies not being filled. So, we've had this huge problem with that already. And now we're going to see even fewer of those vacancies being filled. So anyway, it's sort of an absorbable cost. And then they say it's sanding or shaving because it's like you're going down the whole general ledger and you're just shaving off a little. And of course, on a large budget on $6 billion, it actually adds up, and you can plug some significant hundreds of millions of dollar gaps. The other one, sweeping, is actually kind of has to do with this. It's not something our office works with. We advocate using the money for what it is allocated for, but technically, if it is not encumbered, the legislature can move it, and the other term for that is sort of sweeping it, like you're, sweeping the floor and gathering up these extras.
Yeah.
And so, they're legitimate one-time strategies. And the reason why they're so palatable is because they tend to kind of affect everyone fairly. So no one can sort of say you're picking on me. But if it happens over time, it ignores the fact, of course, that some programs are more important than others, right? Health programs are critical. Maybe some programs are not so critical. So you have to be very careful not to rely on that strategy more than once, because, not every tax dollar is as important as another tax dollar, believe it or not.
I love the fact that you had legislative experience doing this from the legislative side, and now as an auditor, your job is to audit every agency and every department of every agency. Are the agencies cooperative?
By and large, they are. They sort of have to be with our office. It's funny how it works in New Mexico, but being independently elected, we do have certain constitutional authorities, and so they have to share information. And so by and large, actually, we work very, very well with all the state agencies. And one of the neat things, one of the reasons why I ran for this position is because we also audit the cities and the counties and the acequia associations. So we kind of, once a year, we are heavily involved in Santa Fe and state government, but the rest of the year we're out in New Mexico. And we're dealing with, whether it's Roosevelt General Hospital or, different programs in TRC. I mean, there are 900 governments that we audit.
Oh.
So we're very busy locally, too. And in the communities where we are, it's typically an important situation of fraud, waste, or abuse.
Well, one that we spoke about last time you were here, and it's still ongoing, Santa Fe, the city of Santa Fe, had a mysterious disappearance of $30 million from their parks department. And you were investigating that last year. Is there any new news about this? Have they found? There were not even any receipts. I mean, it was pretty blatant.
Well, I'm excited to say that by the time this airs, actually there probably will be some information out on that, but I have to be careful and follow our own rules. But here's the good news, I think, for folks in Santa Fe. We're going to have some answers soon, in a week or two, let's say at this point. And the audit, went through the standard audit process. And a lot of the good news, I think, is a lot of documents were found. A lot of it had to do with the transition in administration, and literally people just didn't know where everything was. So that was all gathered up. But I'll say this, there are some pieces of it that are a tale of caution that everyone in New Mexico should be aware in terms of how they handle their bond dollars.
And are there other areas of the state that have, I'm sure this is in the paper, I would never want you to betray any of, because
Sure.
The important role of your job is the stories you don't tell, as well as the stories you tell. But what stories can you tell about certain parts of the state that you've been working with?
Yeah, we've had a number of, when we conclude an investigation, then it's all kind of public record. So, there's a big mix. And actually, to be fair, this notion of using money that is supposed to go somewhere for something else, usually because of budget pressure, that happens a lot in New Mexico. And so we saw that in McKinley County with DWI funds being for other purposes. They were, still for police pay, but it wasn't for DWI. But then we also see just
Wasn't there one that went to a police Christmas party? Tax funds where was that? Was that in McKinley County?
That wasn't part of ours. I do
Okay.
recall that, but I think that was more of a local audit that was
Okay,
done.
yeah.
And but you see, for example, in Cibola County, in a much more egregious problem that actually led to indictments, we had a county commissioner buy land from himself. So as a commissioner, the county bought the land, he owned the land, and took a fee on the transaction as
Oh
the
my
broker. And then we've got expenditures for machine guns at Walmart and Hooters, so those are the kinds of things where we have to come down hard. And that one actually, again, led to indictments. But we work a lot with law enforcement, with FBI and the state police when there are situations like that. We see a lot of procurement issues, too. So whether it's Torrance County or even down in Doña Ana County, you see, was this contract fairly given? Or was it overbilled? Did that stop sign really cost $10,000 in Torrance County? I don't think it did. So those are the kinds of things that our special investigative unit looks at. But it keeps us front and center in rural New Mexico. And for me, it's a very helpful part of the job to do what we can, not just here in the capital, but all around the state.
Well, I think for our audience, one of the reasons I love doing shows with you and with the auditor's office is that you are actively working to save us money and to keep everybody on the straight and narrow. And if you're able to sweep, sand, and shave and retrieve some of the stranded monies, our taxes could actually go down. And that's so that people who glaze over as soon as they hear it's about finances or about money, no, heads up, it's about your money. And you could be getting more of it. So I really thank you for what you do, and I appreciate the zeal with which you head into this. Now, what should we look for in the future? I mean, we're taping just at the end of the legislative session. It's springtime, hopefully. And so what's coming up for you?
Well, we're going to start a couple of initiatives. This year, we're going to really look at where the contracting dollars go in our state. Do they go out of our state? Do they go to big companies, small companies? And even locally, if you're in Albuquerque, people come from Albuquerque, or if you're in Santa Fe, do they come from Santa Fe? We're going to kind of map out what happens to those dollars. And then we're going to look at, which is related to that, the procurement code, which might sound, not that interesting, but the idea is that our tax dollars come into our government and they go out, usually in the form of goods and services for infrastructure projects and all of this. We want to make sure that that's done in the best way for New Mexico. So we get not only a good product when we purchase something with taxpayer dollars, but also at a good price. And usually you get one or the other. You either get a bad product for
at a
cheap,
great price,
or you really have to pay. And so that's what we're going to really be testing. And you'll see a lot of from our office coming from that. And then we're doing some work around utility pricing. So oddly, check your water bill. And if you think maybe it's not accurate, we now have 4 documented cases around the state of water utility fraud, believe it or not. And sometimes it's people helping out friends. Sometimes it's governments who need money overcharging. So we're going to document all that, and it'll probably be a statewide risk advisory around utility billing.
Oh, that's great, because since we are filming in Santa Fe put in the water department put in a new smart meter system that has been a nightmare for everyone. Just totally wacky, enough to fill 100 swimming pools in a month for a little old lady in a little house. So I'm really happy that you're working about that, because, water is it's such an important issue, and to have it not being distributed in a way with integrity and honesty, that's really important.
Absolutely.
Please give us you say that this is a message of hope you have, and while we can laugh and smile at some of the people that you've caught out,
Sure.
Overall, how is the state doing, and how are you keeping us doing well?
I think at the end of the day, we want to shine a light on what's happening with our tax dollars. And it's a victory for New Mexicans when then other folks say, let's change X or Y, or let's fix Z. That's a good thing. And what we've found is we are really starting discussions in very important areas on how to use our tax dollars. And to me, that's our job. And we have to make sure that everyone knows where those dollars are. For example, this report about unspent funds, it had never been done before. People had looked at slices of it, but there had never been a comprehensive report. And so now we have, essentially a picture of the pie, and we can decide what to do with each piece. But that's what we're doing around the state. And in terms of the quality of how we're handling our money, despite everything that we've talked about, our state is actually in very good shape. We have studied the number of entities that have poor audits and good audits, and what's called findings, which are accounting terms for issues or problems in an audit. And it turns out 96% of the governments in New Mexico have a clean audit.
Yeah.
That is awesome. And that's something we should be proud of. I know there's lots of fraud, waste, and abuse and corruption to go around. But when we get too down on ourselves, let's remember, actually, we do a great job of keeping track of our taxpayer money by and large. It's just some bad apples we really have to crack down on.
And another blessing is that constitutionally we can't operate at a deficit.
Yes.
So built into the structure of our state finances is if you don't have it, you can't spend it. And so between you keeping everyone on the straight and narrow and the fact that this chasm of borrow from mañana is not available to us, we're, despite the recent, difficult news about our deficit, I think we're doing really well, and I really want to thank you for it. So.
Well, I appreciate that. And, I think we have lots of challenges in our state, but we've almost always been able to balance the budget, do it on time, So I think the legislature for 30 days and being citizen legislators, they do what they have to do at least. And a lot of states are not like that. So I think we have that going for us. And also these billions of dollars unspent, it's just like a company or a business that has too much money tied up in inventory and accounts receivables. And what happens is when you use it, it turns into, profit on the bottom line. And for us, that's jobs in New Mexico.
Yeah.
That's more roads, that's more bridges, that's more schools. So that's why I think this is a message of hope.
Well, thank you very much. Our guest today is New Mexico State Auditor Tim Keller. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And I'm Lorene Mills. I'd like to thank you, our audience, for being with us today on Report from Santa Fe. We'll see you next week.
Past archival programs of Report from Santa Fe are available at the website reportfromsantafe.com. If you have questions or comments, please email info@reportfromsantafe.com. Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.